My son slapped a woman in the face, and I couldn't be more proud of how I raised him. I almost didn't answer when the school called. It was 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday, middle of my shift at the law firm, and I had depositions stacked until 6. Then I saw Lincoln High School on the caller ID and my stomach dropped. "Mrs. Garrett, this is Principal Whitfield. There's been an incident involving your son, Adrien. He struck a teacher in the classroom this afternoon. You need to come to the school immediately. The police are already here." My hands went numb around the phone. Adrien was 17, a senior with a 4.2 GPA and early acceptance to 3 universities. He'd never been in a fight, never even raised his voice at anyone. This had to be a mistake, some misunderstanding that would clear up the moment I walked through those doors. I told my boss I had a family emergency and drove to the school going 20 over the speed limit the entire way. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe Adrien had been defending himself. Maybe another student had attacked him and he'd pushed back. But a teacher? That made no sense. Adrien loved school, especially his English class with Ms. Rebecca Holloway. He'd spent weeks on his college essay about how she'd inspired his passion for literature, how she'd stayed after school to help him analyze Faulkner and Morrison, how she saw potential in him that other teachers missed. He talked about her the way students talk about mentors who changed their lives. When I arrived at the administration building, 2 police officers stood outside the principal's office. Through the glass window, I could see Adrien sitting in a chair with his head down, completely still, not fidgeting, not looking around, just frozen. In another office across the hall, Ms. Holloway sat surrounded by other teachers and the school nurse. Even from a distance, I could see the red mark on her left cheek, a perfect handprint, clear and visible and damning. My son had done that. Somehow my quiet, gentle son had struck his favorite teacher in the face hard enough to leave a mark that would photograph well for evidence. Principal Whitfield met me in the hallway before I could reach Adrien. His expression was a careful mask of professional concern mixed with something else. Disappointment, maybe. Or anger, barely contained. "Mrs. Garrett, thank you for coming so quickly. The situation is quite serious. Adrien struck Ms. Holloway during 5th period English class. There were 15 students present who all witnessed the incident. Ms. Holloway has visible injury, as you can see. We've already contacted the police, and they're determining whether to press assault charges. The school board will be meeting tomorrow to discuss immediate expulsion." I tried to process his words, but they felt like they were coming from underwater, distant and distorted. "Can I talk to my son?" I managed to ask. Principal Whitfield nodded slowly. "Of course, but I need you to understand the severity of what happened. We have zero tolerance for violence against staff. Multiple students have already given statements. They all say the same thing." Adrien walked up to Ms. Holloway's desk in the middle of class discussion and slapped her across the face without any provocation. Then he just stood there. Didn't run, didn't apologize, didn't say anything. Just stood there until security arrived. The certainty in his voice made my chest tight. This wasn't a he said she said situation. This was 15 teenage witnesses all telling the same story about an unprovoked attack. I walked into the conference room where Adrien sat alone. The moment I closed the door behind me, he looked up and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not defiance or anger or even fear, just emptiness. Like someone had reached inside my son and scooped out everything that made him Adrien, leaving behind a shell that looked like him, but wasn't. "Mom?" His voice came out flat and mechanical. "I hit her. Everyone saw. There's no point in trying to explain." I pulled a chair next to him and gripped his hands. They were ice cold, despite the warm room. "Adrien, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Why did you hit Ms. Holloway? What did she do?" He shook his head slowly, still not really looking at me. "It doesn't matter what she did. I'm the one who hit a teacher. That's all anyone cares about. That's all they need to know." His resignation terrified me more than anger would have. This wasn't my son. Adrien argued about everything, defended every position, never backed down from what he believed was right. This empty acceptance was wrong. Something had broken inside him and I didn't know how or why. "Adrien," I said more firmly, "look at me. Tell me what happened before you hit her." He finally met my eyes and I saw tears forming. "She showed something in class today, on the projector. Something she wasn't supposed to show. What did she show?" I asked, keeping my voice calm even though my heart was hammering. Adrien's jaw clenched and unclenched several times before he could speak. "Photos. Of me. From summer camp 2 years ago when I was 15. In the shower. Getting changed. His voice cracked completely. "She put them up on the screen, just for a few seconds, then acted like it was an accident, like she'd clicked the wrong file. But everyone saw Mom. Everyone saw me naked. And they started laughing. Trevor and Austin were trying to hold it in, but then Kayla screamed and covered her eyes, and that made everyone laugh harder. Ms. Holloway said she was so sorry, that files got mixed up, but she was smiling. I saw her smile before she changed the slide. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. Ms. Holloway had been a counselor at Camp Riverside 2 summers ago. Adrien had loved that camp. Came home talking about the hiking and the lake and the astronomy program. I'd never questioned why his beloved English teacher had also worked there. Never thought it was anything but a fortunate coincidence that brought them together. Now that coincidence felt sinister. How did she have those photos? Why did she have them? And why would she show them to a classroom full of teenagers? Adrien was still talking, words tumbling out now that the dam had broken. After she changed the slide, everyone was still laughing and whispering, pointing at me, taking out their phones. I knew those photos would be everywhere by the end of the day. Already posted, already shared, already permanent. And she just stood there saying it was an unfortunate technical error, looking at me with that smile. So I walked up to her desk and I slapped her, hard as I could, and I'm glad I did. I stood up so fast the chair scraped loudly against the floor. Stay here. Don't say anything to anyone until I come back. Do you understand? Adrien nodded, that empty look returning to his face. I walked out of the conference room and straight across the hall to where Ms. Holloway sat. She looked up when I entered, her expression shifting to concerned sympathy. The red mark on her cheek had darkened to a proper bruise. Mrs. Garrett, I'm so sorry about all this. I don't know what came over Adrien. He's always been such a wonderful student. I've tried to be understanding, but I cut her off. You showed photos of my son naked in front of his entire class. Her face froze, that sympathetic expression cracking just slightly around the edges. I don't know what Adrien told you, but there was an unfortunate technical issue with my presentation files. Some personal photos accidentally appeared for just a moment before I could change slides. It was completely unintentional. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recorder app, hitting record before I spoke again. So you're admitting you had personal photos of my 15-year-old son showering at summer camp on your school computer? Her eyes widened slightly. They were just in my photo library from when I worked at the camp. They weren't supposed to be in the presentation folder. But you had them, I pressed. You had naked photos of underage boys from a camp where you worked as a counselor. And today those photos appeared during your class presentation, where my son and 14 other students could see them. Ms. Holloway stood up quickly, her chair rolling backward. This is a misunderstanding. I'm the victim here. Your son assaulted me. There are 15 witnesses. I'm the one with injuries. The school nurse has already documented everything. I smiled without any warmth. Yes, let's talk about those 15 witnesses, because I'm going to speak to every single one of them. And then I'm going to request all of your school computer files through a discovery motion. And then I'm going to contact the camp and request their counselor background check materials and any complaints filed during your employment. Ms. Holloway's face had gone very pale. You're overreacting. Your son is facing serious charges. You should be focused on getting him help, not making wild accusations about me. Principal Whitfield appeared in the doorway. Is everything all right in here? I turned to him. I need to see the full video of what happened in that classroom. Lincoln High had cameras in every room after the shooting scare 3 years ago. The feeds were stored on secure servers and only accessible to administration and security. Principal Whitfield frowned. The camera footage shows exactly what I already told you. Adrien walked up and struck Ms. Holloway. There was no physical provocation. Does it show what was on the projector screen? I asked. Principal Whitfield hesitated. The camera angle doesn't capture the projection screen clearly. It focuses on the students and teacher, so you can't see what Ms. Holloway was showing the class when this happened. His frown deepened. Mrs. Garrett, I understand you're trying to defend your son, but multiple students have given consistent statements. Then let's ask those students what was on the screen, I said. Right now, before anyone has time to coordinate their stories or delete photos from their phones. Let's bring them in one at a time and ask them exactly what they saw on Ms. Holloway's presentation. Principal Whitfield looked at Ms. Holloway, whose face had gone from pale to gray. I don't think that's necessary. The students are already traumatized by witnessing violence. We shouldn't subject them to interrogation. I pulled out my phone. Fine. Then I'll call my lawyer and we'll subpoena every student, every phone, every computer file. We'll make this as public and thorough as possible. I'm sure the local news would be very interested in a story about a teacher showing inappropriate photos of students. Ms. Holloway, would you like to explain to Channel 7 why you had naked photos of teenage boys on your school computer? Wait, Principal Whitfield said sharply. Just wait. Let's not escalate this unnecessarily. He looked at Ms. Holloway again. Rebecca, what exactly was on that presentation? She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Her hands were shaking now. It was just a technical error. Files got mixed up. It could happen to anyone. What files? He asked, his voice taking on an edge I hadn't heard before. What photos are we talking about? Before she could answer, there was a knock on the door. One of the police officers poked his head in. Principal Whitfield, we need you. One of the students is asking to speak to us about what happened in the classroom. Says there's something important we need to know before we charge the kid. We all moved into the hallway. A tall senior I recognized as Trevor Kimball stood with the other officer, his face flushed and his hands clenched into fists. Trevor was on the debate team with Adrien, had been to our house for study sessions a dozen times. When he saw Ms. Holloway, something flashed across his face. Not fear exactly, but something close. Principal Whitfield, Trevor said, his voice shaking slightly. I need to tell you what really happened in that classroom, and I need to show you something on my phone. He unlocked his phone and pulled up his photos, then handed it to the principal. His hand was trembling. Ms. Holloway did the same thing to me last year. She showed photos of me from camp during a class presentation, said it was an accident, but I don't think it was. The room went completely silent. Principal Whitfield stared at Trevor's phone, his face draining of color. When he looked up at Ms. Holloway, his expression had transformed from defensive administrator to something much darker. My office. Now. All of you. We moved as a group down the hall. More students had gathered, word spreading that something big was happening. I saw phones out, recording. Social media would have this story before we even finished whatever conversation was about to happen. In the principal's office, Whitfield closed the door and turned to face Ms. Holloway. His voice was deadly quiet. How many students? She backed against the wall, shaking her head. I don't know what you're talking about. This is absurd. These students are clearly coordinating some kind of campaign against me because I maintain high academic standards. Trevor pulled out his phone again. I have screenshots from last year. 3 other guys in my class saw photos of themselves from camp. We all thought it was just a weird accident. We were too embarrassed to say anything because everyone had already seen us naked. We just wanted it to go away. But it wasn't an accident, was it? Ms. Holloway looked at Principal Whitfield with desperation. They're lying. They're all lying to protect their friend who assaulted me. Look at my face. I have injuries. This is witness intimidation. One of the police officers stepped forward. Ma'am, we're going to need to see your school computer and your personal devices. Right now. Ms. Holloway's face went from gray to white. You can't do that without a warrant. I have privacy rights. The officer smiled without humor. You just told us you have photos of students on your school-issued computer. That computer belongs to the district. They can grant us access. Principal Whitfield was already on the phone. I need IT to lock down Rebecca Holloway's account immediately. All devices, all cloud storage, everything. No, I don't care what time it is. Do it now. Within 15 minutes, the school's IT director arrived with a laptop. Jeffrey Wu was in his 40s, always looked exhausted, and ran the entire technology infrastructure for Lincoln High with a staff of 2. He logged into Ms. Holloway's account remotely and started pulling up folders. His expression grew grimmer with each click. Principal Whitfield, you need to see this. We all crowded around the laptop. Wu opened a folder labeled Camp Resources 2021. Inside were hundreds of photos, boys in various states of undress, showering, changing, sleeping. The metadata showed they were taken with a phone camera, not an official camp camera. Many were zoomed in on specific boys. Some had dates and times attached. Wu clicked on another folder labeled Presentations. Inside were multiple PowerPoint files. He opened one at random. It was a standard English literature presentation about The Great Gatsby, 30 slides of text and historical photos. Then, buried at slide 23, a photo of a teenage boy in a shower. Wu opened another presentation. Same thing. Legitimate educational content with a single inappropriate photo hidden in the middle. Wu stopped, looking sick. This is systematic. She's been doing this for years. How many? Principal Whitfield asked. Wu scrolled through the folder structure. 12 different students identified by name in subfolder titles. 847 total photos across all folders. And, he clicked deeper, there's a document here labeled Response Tracking. He opened it. It was a spreadsheet. Names of boys in one column, dates in another, then columns labeled Initial Reaction, Embarrassment Level, Receptive to Contact, and Follow-up Scheduled. My stomach turned. She was tracking them, tracking their responses, seeing which boys were vulnerable enough for whatever came next. Ms. Holloway had stopped protesting. She just stood against the wall, completely still, watching her career and freedom evaporate in real time. Trevor's voice cut through the horrified silence. She offered me private tutoring sessions after she showed my photos, said she wanted to help me with my college essays, that she felt terrible about the accident and wanted to make it up to me. She kept messaging me, asking me to come to her classroom after school when no one else was there. I didn't go because something felt wrong, but now I understand what she was doing. She was using the photos to humiliate us, then offering comfort, making herself the only person who could make us feel better about the humiliation she caused. One of the officers was already on his radio. We need detectives and a warrant. Possible child exploitation case at Lincoln High School. Female teacher, multiple victims, digital evidence. Ms. Holloway finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I want a lawyer. The officer nodded. You're going to need one. The next hours were a blur. Detectives arrived. The FBI field office sent agents specializing in child exploitation. Every student from Ms. Holloway's classes over the past 4 years was interviewed. Parents were called. The school was locked down. News vans appeared in the parking lot. Ms. Holloway was led out in handcuffs, her head down, while cameras flashed. Adrien sat in the conference room the entire time, still in that dissociative state, until I wrapped my arms around him and felt him finally break down sobbing. I kept thinking about what Trevor had said. She offered comfort after causing the humiliation. That was the pattern. Create the wound, then position yourself as the healer. Target boys who were already vulnerable, already isolated, already unsure of themselves. Use their shame to control them. Make them believe she was the only one who understood. By evening, 23 boys had been identified as victims. Some had been photographed at camp. Others had photos taken in school locker rooms, apparently with hidden cameras. All of them had been subjected to Ms. Holloway's accidental presentations, where their naked bodies appeared for just a few seconds before she apologized profusely and moved on. Most had been too embarrassed to tell anyone. Many had accepted her offers of private tutoring, one-on-one mentoring, special attention. The FBI found evidence that several of those private sessions had escalated beyond appropriate teacher-student relationships. The full scope of her predation was still being uncovered. Ms. Holloway's lawyer released a statement calling the charges baseless and claiming she was the real victim of a coordinated smear campaign by troubled students. But the digital evidence was overwhelming. The photos, the spreadsheet, the hidden cameras found in air vents above the boys' locker room, text messages saved on her phone where she'd groomed multiple students over years. Her carefully constructed image as Teacher of the Year nominee crumbled under the weight of documented systematic abuse. Principal Whitfield held a parent meeting 3 days later. The gym was packed with furious families demanding to know how this had gone undetected for so long. How had no one noticed a teacher collecting hundreds of inappropriate photos? How had no student reports raised red flags? Whitfield looked 20 years older as he admitted the failures. 2 boys had complained about feeling uncomfortable around Ms. Holloway in previous years. Both complaints had been dismissed as teenage awkwardness or misunderstandings. The system had failed. The oversight had failed. The adults meant to protect students had failed. And now 23 families were dealing with the trauma of their sons being victimized by someone they'd trusted. I sat in that gym with Adrien beside me, listening to other parents share their sons' experiences, and felt a complicated mix of emotions. Rage at Ms. Holloway for what she'd done. Rage at the school for not seeing it sooner. But also, strangely, pride in my son. Because Adrien had done what so many others couldn't. When she humiliated him in front of his peers, when she violated his privacy and body autonomy, when she smiled at his trauma, he'd reacted. Not with silence or shame or acceptance, with immediate, physical rejection of what she was doing. That slap wasn't violence, it was refusal. It was a 17-year-old boy saying no with his body when his words weren't enough. The criminal case moved forward quickly. Ms. Holloway was charged with 23 counts of possession of child pornography, multiple counts of sexual exploitation of minors, and several counts of sexual assault for the encounters that had gone beyond photos. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal. The prosecutor refused. This was going to trial. The defense strategy became clear during pre-trial hearings. They planned to paint the boys as willing participants who'd been flattered by an attractive teacher's attention. They planned to argue that the photos were taken for legitimate camp documentation purposes. They planned to claim that Adrien's violence proved he was unstable and his accusations unreliable. The prosecutor was a woman in her 50s named Catherine Vance, who'd spent 20 years handling sex crimes. She stood up in that courtroom and dismantled every argument with cold precision. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery with other victims' families. 23 boys testified. Some could barely speak through their tears. Others delivered their testimony with flat, emotionless voices that made the trauma somehow worse. Trevor Kimball took the stand and described in detail how Ms. Holloway had pursued him after showing his photos, how she'd made him feel special, chosen, mature beyond his years, how she'd convinced him that their relationship was mutual and consensual even though he was 16 and she was his teacher, how it took 2 years of therapy before he could even call what happened to him assault. Adrien's testimony was the shortest. The prosecutor asked him to describe what happened the day he struck Ms. Holloway. Adrien looked directly at her and said, "She showed photos of me naked to my entire class." She smiled while they laughed. I hit her to make it stop. I'd do it again. The defense attorney tried to paint Adrien as violent and unstable, tried to suggest his reaction was disproportionate and criminal, but Catherine Vance's redirect was devastating. She asked Adrien a single question. "When you hit Mrs. Holloway, what were you defending?" Adrien's answer was quiet but clear. "My right to say no to someone violating my body." The jury was out for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Ms. Holloway showed no emotion as the verdict was read, just stared straight ahead as if none of this was really happening. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. 40 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole before serving 30. The judge's statement was scathing. She talked about the profound betrayal of trust, the systematic nature of the abuse, the calculated grooming of vulnerable children. She noted that Ms. Holloway had shown no remorse, no acknowledgement of harm, no acceptance of responsibility. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a predator who spent years cultivating access to victims and perfecting her methods. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the victims' families. Microphones were shoved in faces, questions shouted, cameras clicking constantly. Most families rushed past without comment, but I stopped. With Adrien standing beside me, I made a statement. "My son struck a teacher who was sexually exploiting him and 22 other boys. He's been called violent, unstable, a criminal. But what he actually did was refuse to be victimized silently. He said no with his body when his voice wasn't enough, and I'm proud of him. Not for the violence itself, but for the refusal to accept what was being done to him. For standing up when standing up meant being seen as the bad guy. That takes courage most adults don't have. The clip went viral. Hundreds of thousands of views in the first day. Comments were split between people who understood what I meant and people who thought I was advocating violence against teachers. But I didn't care about the comments. I cared about the messages that started coming in. From men who'd been abused as boys and never reported it. From parents whose sons had been victimized by trusted adults. From survivors who'd spent decades being told their trauma didn't count because their abuser was a woman, or because they should have enjoyed it, or because boys can't really be assaulted. The messages all said the same thing. Thank you for believing your son. Thank you for fighting for him. Thank you for saying out loud that male victims matter. Adrien graduated 3 months later. Lincoln High held a small ceremony for the senior class, subdued and somber compared to previous years. The school board had implemented new policies about teacher-student contact, digital device monitoring, and mandatory reporting. Principal Whitfield had retired, unable to handle the guilt of missing the signs. A new principal delivered the graduation speech about resilience and moving forward. When Adrien walked across the stage to receive his diploma, the auditorium erupted in applause. Not polite graduation clapping, but sustained, standing applause that went on for nearly a minute. Every victim's family was there. Every parent who'd fought through the trauma and the trial and the media circus. They were applauding my son, and through him, all their sons. For surviving, for speaking up, for refusing to disappear. Adrien deferred his college acceptance for a year. He wasn't ready to leave home yet, wasn't ready to be in an institutional setting with authority figures. He got a job at a local bookstore and started intensive therapy with a counselor who specialized in male sexual assault survivors. Slowly, over months, he started coming back to himself. The empty, dissociative look faded. He laughed again, made plans for the future again, started believing that what happened didn't define his entire life. But the trauma was still there, would always be there in some form. He had nightmares about cameras, couldn't be in rooms with only one exit, struggled with trust in ways that broke my heart. Ms. Holloway had taken something from him that he'd never fully get back. The civil suits took longer than the criminal case. All 23 families sued the school district for negligence and failure to protect. The district's lawyers fought viciously, trying to minimize liability and paint the victims as partially responsible for not reporting sooner. But the evidence was overwhelming. The ignored complaints, the lack of oversight, the cameras that should have been monitored but weren't, the background checks that were never completed properly. Eventually, the district settled for a total of $47 million across all families. Adrien's portion was $2.1 million held in trust until he turned 25. It felt obscene, putting a dollar value on what had been stolen from him. But the lawyer explained it wasn't about making it right. Nothing could make it right. It was about acknowledging harm and providing resources for the lifetime of therapy and support he'd need. 3 years have passed since that day in the classroom. Adrien is 20 now. In his second year of college, after taking that gap year, he's studying psychology with a focus on trauma and recovery. Plans to become a therapist specializing in male assault survivors. He wants to be for other boys what his therapist was for him. Someone who understands that victimization doesn't make you weak or broken or less of a man. Someone who knows that fighting back, even when it looks messy or violent or wrong to outsiders, is sometimes the only way to reclaim your body and your autonomy. He gives talks sometimes, at schools and community centers, about his experience. Talks about the grooming patterns female predators use, about why male victims don't report, about the shame and confusion of being assaulted by someone society says you should want, about how that slap saved his life because it forced the truth into the open before Ms. Holloway could do more damage. I keep a news clipping from the trial on my desk at work. It's a photo of Adrien on the courthouse steps, standing straight and steady, his face serious but not defeated. The headline reads, "Survivor Speaks, Why I Hit Back." In the photo, you can see other victims' families in the background, all of them together, all of them witnesses to each other's pain and strength. I look at that photo when I need to remember why I practice law, why I fight for people no one else believes, why I refuse to accept the narrative that the person with visible injuries is automatically the victim. Sometimes the real victim is the one who hit back, the one who said no when no was the most dangerous thing they could say. Miss and Holloway is in federal prison in Texas. She'll be eligible for parole when she's 73 years old, assuming she lives that long. I don't think about her often, don't waste energy on hatred or vengeance, but sometimes I wonder if she understands what she did, if she grasps the magnitude of harm she caused to 23 boys and their families, if she feels remorse or just self-pity. The answer doesn't really matter. What matters is that she can't hurt anyone else, that her carefully constructed predator's paradise was dismantled, that the boys she victimized are healing, slowly and imperfectly, but healing nonetheless. That one 17-year-old's refusal to accept humiliation silently led to justice for 22 others. That's the legacy of Adrien's slap. Not violence for violence's sake, but the absolute rejection of abuse by someone who finally had enough. People still ask me sometimes how I can be proud of my son for hitting a woman. They say violence is never the answer. They say he should have reported it properly, gone through channels, trusted the system. I tell them the system had already failed. 2 boys had reported discomfort with Ms. Holloway and were dismissed. She'd been collecting photos and grooming victims for years, while administrators looked the other way. The system wasn't going to save Adrien or any of those boys. Sometimes you have to save yourself. Sometimes saving yourself looks like violence to people who don't understand the context. And sometimes a mother's job is to stand next to her son and say, I believe you. I'm proud of you. You did what you needed to do to survive. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.